time to pull up a chair and talk some Dynasty Football. I am Joseph Harlow with my co-host Jameson, middle name Rules, last name Hutchison. JJ is out today being an awesome teacher, like usual, so we're holding down the fort. Jameson, it is great to see you. Hope you're doing all right, especially after our discussion on sophomores last week. This week, we're going to follow a similar path, talking about juniors, third-year players, see which ones we're in on, which ones we're out on. Find out the specifics after this once I can get to the intro, which is hiding from you right now.
Be there shortly.
There we go.
It is good to be back this week. We're going to obviously talking some third-year players that can break out, but before we do, we had a loss in the fantasy community today. Anthony Servino, a friend of mine. Just a quick story real quick. A couple years ago when I had started I did some of my own content. I ran my own website. It was absolutely terrible, and I still wanted to do content, but didn't know where. But I saw a post on Twitter about, hey, anybody new, like if anybody's wanting to become a writer or a content creator, please reach out. And I reached out to Anthony, and I mean, I could not have asked for anybody who could have supported me more. Just gone out of his way time and time again. Did a whole bunch for me. I remember doing the Hayden Hurst mental health podathon. I did a whopping 12 hours of it with him on a Sunday, and just had the opportunity to talk to so many different people. The opportunity to do video content, which was something I hadn't done a whole lot of, but if anything, get 12 hours out of it. And he was somebody who gave me that chance and that opportunity. Along with that, it was just outside of obviously fantasy football, which he grinded more than anybody. The awareness for mental health, he was a mental health advocate, was very open about his struggles. And in the time that we needed, I know it's starting to come more to the forefront now, but he was somebody who was waving the flag for everybody. And then, of course, his family. That was something that was very near and dear to him as well. I remember seeing, if you have seen Anthony, he is a huge dude that's just jacked to the gills, just full of muscle. And then he'd post on Twitter these pictures of his Pomeranian puppy. So just kind of funny to see that. But, from the words of encouragement to always being ear, always helping out any way to give advice, what to do, what not to do. The old times that we would talk, 80s WWF back in the day. It's just Anthony couldn't have been a better friend, a better mentor, and a lot of the stuff that I have today, as far as friendships, the opportunity to do video content, a lot of this stuff wouldn't have ever happened if it wasn't for him when I was first starting out. So, just wanted to make sure I said something about Anthony. I think he is somebody who the world needs more of. People like him. He's a big loss in the fantasy community, not only as a content creator, but as a person too, because not only me that he helped so many others either get started or push him along the right path. So I just wanted to say, we love you, Anthony. We're going to miss you. Thinking about his wife, Maggie, and his 10-year-old son. There's a GoFundMe over on Twitter. I've retweeted it. It's also in the Fantasy and Frames Discord. If anybody wants to help out there, and if you can't donate, at least share the link. Just in case somebody else can see it. So I just want to take a minute there, just talk about Anthony, who will be dearly missed. So not really a good transition out of these things ever. I wish there was a Dallas Cowboy that we could talk about, because it'd be kind of funny to talk about that. That was his favorite team. So, but I just wanted to, like I said, just take a minute, talk about Anthony, who is one of the good ones, and a guy who's just gone far too soon.
Yeah, thoughts and prayers with his family and everyone who knew him.
So, with that being said, like I said, there's no easy transition into this, but we are talking year 3 players. And I guess, Joe, we'll just start off with quarterbacks. Some guys we're not going to talk about, Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Devon Achane, and Puka Nacua, just because they've kind of cemented their star status. So we're going to start off with quarterbacks.
Guys like CJ Stroud, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Sam Laporta. If time allows, we'll touch on them as the kind of borderline superstar guys. But again, that'll be a later discussion if we have time.
Yep. So, but we're going to kick it off with the quarterbacks, like I said. And we're going to kick it off with Bryce Young, who I think, me personally, I'm excited for him. Came on really strong at the end of the year. Had a very funky couple years starting out in the league, but Andy Dalton gets hurt with the thumb injury, and he still ends up the year with 2 top 3 finishes in the last 3 weeks. So he's got a new offensive weapon in Tet McMillan. offense should be better. The offensive line is improved. I think for me, it's just really trying to figure out his ceiling, and that's where I'm going to ask you, Joe. We know he improved at the end of the year, but like, where do you see the ceiling for Bryce Young as a, fantasy quarterback here?
I still don't see a fantasy quarterback one. Just maybe I'm just sizist, but the physical limitations, again, he's 5'9", 200 at best, so doesn't have the power arm. I think has the good mobility, as we saw over that 7-game stretch at the end of the year with 5 rushing touchdowns. But I don't think that's going to be normal. Again, in those last 7 weeks, he played really one competent defense, maybe two. I don't remember how. I think Dallas was at that point really scuffling.
Yep. He's only hit 250 plus yards passing in 3 times. So, talking about, like you said, the ceiling, I don't really see a top 1 quarterback in and out. I think he can be borderline top 10 if like the touchdowns come his way. He does have a little bit of rushing, but this is a run-first team. They just signed Chuba Hubbard, brought in Trevor Etienne and Rico Dowdle. I mean, they plan on running the rock and using the deep play action. So he's interesting because a lot of people thought Bryce Young, as far as the dynasty value, was just dead in the water. Kind of revitalized himself a little bit. But as far as, do you hold and kind of see where it goes from here, or is this just like you see a little bit of light and kind of sell off before, if this is the top peak for him?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's the peak necessarily, but he's someone I'm not super looking to buy just because his price is super inflated off those 7 great games and being the former first overall pick plus T-Mac, who I know we both loved. So it's probably a hold right now, but it's a quarterback 12, 15, maybe closer to 15 dynasty rank right now for me.
Yeah, that's maybe about where it is. Like I said, compared to the last couple of years, I think that is awesome if you were really in on him and saw how the first like couple of years have went out for him. So I think there's more to improve with Bryce Young, but as far as like him becoming obviously he's not going to become a top 5 quarterback, but even like top 10, I think ends up really pushing it. So
yeah, definitely would love to have him as my quarterback 2 in a dynasty league.
And I would agree there. So with that being said, the other top 5 pick in this draft, Anthony Richardson. Yeah, this is both you and I loved Anthony Richardson. News come out today that his shoulder hurts again, and I'm just going to be honest, Joe. I think this is just done. I think the train has crashed. So
yeah, at this point, I'd buy him in Dynasty League because you could probably get him in the Superflex for a third at this point. So for that price, why not? I'd rather go for him than looking at this class, take like a Will Howard. But especially with Aaron Rodgers now signing or agreeing to a deal. But yeah, it's over for AR.
Yeah, I felt that kind of before this injury. I thought Daniel Jones was going to end up being the week 1 starter. It seemed like the Colts were tired of AR's shenanigans at the end of last season. I know he had the game that he walked himself off the field and everybody got up in arms. But the problem with him is you can't sustain drives with him. It's always 3 and out. For a guy that we drafted hoping for the ceiling games from, he only had 4 games at 20 plus points. So it's not like he was really that startable when he was on the field. And it just, this is a guy that I don't think another team can take the time to make a project on either. That's the other part of the program that sucks.
He was mismanaged from the start, in my opinion. I don't think the Colts did him any favors. Then he didn't do himself many favors, factoring injuries too. Just, yeah, it sucks.
What a shame. But before we get to running backs, just want to point out for all the folks who are listening, don't forget to listen to all the podcasts and all the other shows here at Fantasy and Frames. Head over to fantasyandframes.com for all the latest articles, rankings, all sorts of topics. IDP, we got some IDP experts. We got Joe giving off articles, seems like every day at this point, but a bunch of content over at fantasyframes.com. Over on Twitter, Blue Sky, we got Discord, we got YouTube. Make sure to like and subscribe there. So, got a little bit of everything over here at Fantasy and Frames. So, with that being said, we're going to get running backs now, which there's a couple of them that are pretty interesting. I'm going to kick it off with probably one of, if not my favorite, handcuff running backs here in Zach Charbonnet. So, Do you like him as much as I do, Joe?
I don't think so. I was never really high on him, and I don't think.
Man.
Yeah, I wasn't super low on him per se. I just think he's just a guy, just solid at pretty much everything. But I think he's very uninspiring. Would much rather Kenneth Walker, obviously. But yeah,
Are you very in on Kenneth Walker? Is that your stance?
I wouldn't say super in. Just I need to see it from this version of the Seahawks before believing it. But I'll probably have Walker. He's probably close to 15 for both redraft and dynasty running backs for me right now. Give or take a few slots.
It seems like a lot of people are getting excited about him. But
yeah,
per PFF for Zach Charbonnet, when he filled in for Kenneth Walker, his 18 touches and 100 yards average on 6 starts. So, and he also had a running back 1 overall finish in week 14. For me personally, I'm a little worried about Kenneth Walker. I think a lot of people are getting super excited for him because he's got the home run ability, but some of the metrics, along with just the offensive line for Seattle, that's been just kind of a disaster, it seems like, especially on the interior. You get the upgrade with Sam Darnold, which I don't even know if it's an upgrade from Geno Smith, and then you lose DK Metcalf and replace him with Cooper Kupp.
Downgrade, in my opinion.
Yeah, it just ends up being offensive, I guess, ceiling. We'll see about the offensive line. I think that's obviously a big one, but I like Zach Charbonnet not a lot. And then you have Clint Kubiak coming in as offensive coordinator. So, he could definitely just take a preference to Zach Charbonnet over Kenneth Walker if that ends up. We see these coaching staffs do that all the time. People, pick one thing and then, they kind of flip and do the other if they like the other guy who's more reliable more. So,
with the new staff, there's not loyalty to either, really. So,
right. So
I like be a hot hand.
I like Zach Charbonnet a lot. For me personally, I think he's one of my favorite. He's probably top 3 running back handcuff for me, behind obviously Tyler Algier, who doesn't obviously have the upside as Bijan, and then going from there. So next guy we're going to talk about is kind of an interesting one. Tajay Spears had top 12 finish in the last 3 games, mainly because of his receiving role. So how do you feel about Tajay Spears, Joe?
I've never been a Tony Pollard guy, so I feel fine about Spears. It's a weird time for the offense right now. Just so much turnover. The rookie quarterback, which even I like Cam Ward a lot, but he's still a rookie. Tony Pollard will get his touches after he was still very highly paid running back and was solid last year.
Yep.
I don't remember where he finished fantasy-wise off the top of my head, but I think still solid, probably firmly RB2. Yeah, and as a handcuff upside shot, I'm fine with it, especially redraft-wise. If you're looking that hero RB style and then just wanting to take some shots late, there's a chance the Titans are just getting blown out all the time, and he's racking up the garbage time points. Or if Tony Pollard gets hurt, as he's been prone to do, I don't see much of a difference archetype-wise between the two. So it could just be Spears going from 40% to 80% of touches.
Right. Pollard finished RB21 last year. So I thought, especially coming off the year of the ankle injury, where it seemed like a lot of these guys, it takes like a year to come back from, the Titans' offensive line has improved. I know we said that last year, but they've added some more. They upgraded quarterback to Cam Ward.
To be fair, it was still true last year.
Yeah. So seems like they're starting to solidify some stuff. I'm a Tony Pollard guy. I thought there were some glimpses last year of when he had that huge year in Dallas. He just goes to the outside, has that outside run and just kind of takes off. And I know the end of the year was pretty goofy, just the injuries to both of these guys, because Tajay Spears had like a concussion, had an ankle injury, just a little bit of everything. But I just thought it was interesting kind of looking back at some of the stats that top 12 finish in the last 3 games last year. So he's obviously the receiving portion of the program in this backfield. And I think the Titans offense is kind of interesting to attack in general, just because it's Calvin Ridley and friends. Everybody just assumes they're going to stink terribly. If they were middle of the pack, I think these guys end up being fantasy viable. So I've never been a huge Tajay Spears guy, but I'm very open, especially in Dynasty, to take a shot on him as one of these kind of handcuff running backs.
Yeah, so I really liked him as a talent coming out of Tulane, but I still always thought the fit was weird once Pollard came over. I feel like if swap Spears with a guy we'll talk about in a few names, that would make more sense. But him and Pollard are so similar. It's a weird fit to me.
Yeah. So, because like a lot of these running backs, you think they gel kind of like peanut butter and jelly, and I don't think Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears like abilities really mesh necessarily.
Yeah,
Not saying
like
they're
jelly
like the
and
same.
jelly.
Yeah, they're not like the same
Jelly
player,
and
but it's
honey.
just right, something like that. Just something different and a little bit goofy.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but next guy on the list, this is another interesting guy who had a lot more production than I think a lot of people expected. Would be Tank Bigsby in Jacksonville. This is another prospect that looked dead in the water his rookie year, just like Bryce Young did, and then really came on last year. Had 766 yards and 7 touchdowns. A really interesting backfield here with Michelle Tootin and Travis Etienne coming back from injury or whatever it is with him. Liam Cohen as offensive coordinator. How do you feel about Tank Bigsby? And is this a guy that you are in on?
I'm not in on him. I'm not going to say I'm out. I don't know how to read this backfield. I always have been a ETN hater. Yeah, it's so weird with Tootin, who I'm also not super high on. I feel like it makes most sense to just cut ties with ETN, have Bigsby as the early down back, and Tootin as kind of the flex play sort of deal, the scat back thing I was looking for. But I have no idea, to be totally honest. I guess I'd lean out.
I wouldn't be surprised. Tank Bigsby, really, I think he caught 7 passes last year. This is not a guy that has any receiving chops, and that's not going to be part of his game. I wouldn't be surprised if Tootin, who has a fumbling issue coming in as a rookie, I think a lot of people tend to ignore that stuff and just get really excited about the explosiveness. I think if Tootin were to dive into anything, it'd be more into ETN's role, and then Tank Bigsby kind of ends up being, I don't want to call him a hammer because he's got some breakaway speed. We saw him this past year kind of break off some stuff and just had some longer runs. Offense is going to be a lot better. He can obviously, if they start running the ball in the end zone, just seems like this backfield, they had Bucky Irving last year in Tampa Bay with Liam Cohen, and they tried to make this happen with Tank Bigsby. So I'm kind of interested in him. I think he's a great back end RB2, RB3 kind of range that I do think actually has a little bit of a safe floor. I think he's going to actually get some run this year. So
I'm curious what happens, but I think I'm probably going to stay away from all 3 of them, at least this year. I don't really know how it shapes out. I'd probably assume all of them disappoint, I'd think.
Right. So last guy here for the running backs would be Roschon Johnson. This guy that's fighting DeAndre Swift here in Chicago. Had 150 yards last year, but somehow managed to get 6 touchdowns. I know a lot of people like him. A lot of people are very interested in Roschon Johnson. That'd be you, Joe. I feel like we've been trying to sell this the last couple of years, and it's just not something I'm buying. But if you've got a case for Roschon Johnson, I'd love to hear it.
That he's clearly the best running back on the team.
Is that really saying much, though?
No, but someone has to get the touches. I like Kyle Monangai, but 7th round bruising back is all he is. Roschon is a really good pass catcher, really good hands. He's one of the best one of the best pass pro backs in the league, which for a quarterback who I love Caleb Williams, but he kind of needs some additional help with the freelancing up there. So I think Roschon on the field a lot makes sense. We've seen DeAndre Swift in Ben Johnson's offense, and it worked, well, not great. So he got kicked to the curb pretty quickly. So I think I'm holding on to all my Roschon shares. I mean, you can't sell him for anything right now anyway, but right. I don't see why he can't be a low-end running back 2, mid-level running back 3, especially if he gets the 60% workload.
Is this a guy that you're trying to throw a late-round kind of like draft pick in Dynasty for? See if anybody would just...
I'd be willing to throw 4th rounder at him for sure. Maybe a 3-4 swap sort of deal.
Gotcha. So
I'm not going to give like a 2nd rounder for him, but
obviously not. But I see a lot of the hype for him, and it seems like a lot of people. I shouldn't say a lot of people. Are just some people are in. I'm not a DeAndre Swift guy. I want to make that totally clear. Mm-hmm. So, but people like the offense.
That's a big part of it.
So
if I like DeAndre Swift, it'd be a very different story. But.
Right. So, but we're going to move into wide receivers. But before we do that, I want to talk about the Fast Draft app. If you were into best ball, the Fast Draft app, if we have here at Fantasy Frames a promo code Frames, will earn your first time deposit match up to $50 in credits. So, from the Origins game where you only draft rookies to their Flex 4 game where you pick your 4 favorite players for the upcoming season, and for those IDP degenerates, they have the D Up game, just like Flex 4 but with IDP players only. So your Trey Hendricksons, your TJ Watts, all those big guys. The 20-second timer, PPR format, 6-round best ball draft game is perfect for those on the go but itching to get their fantasy football draft fix satisfied. So, promo code Frames gets you first time deposit match for $50 in credits over at Fast Draft. I've used it personally, so I did it when I was over at the Expo. We need to get it here in Indiana so I can play it every day. But like I said, I really enjoyed it, and I know a lot of people who have it available do as well. So promo code Frames gets you $50 in credits. So going to wide
Before we move
receivers
on,
now.
I think we
Go ahead.
forgot to mention that we will not be discussing Chase Brown. I think he's pretty locked in at this.
Yeah, I would say that as well. So going to kick off wide receivers here. Jackson Smith and Njigba, he already did his. I think we can kind of get away from him.
Yeah.
And then we'll move on to Zay Flowers here. So Zay Flowers, very interesting prospect to say the least. He was wide receiver 22 last year with 1,059 yards and 4 touchdowns. How do you feel about Zay Flowers? Because I think seeing the numbers overall and seeing them week to week is a totally different ball game.
Yeah, he's super hit or miss. Not someone I would love as my wide receiver 1. Probably wouldn't love as a wide receiver 2 on a competitive build. But like he has the big play potential with almost 1,000 yards or right around there. Lamar Jackson is much better as a passer than anyone gives credit for. So, and their top target with Mark Andrews falling off a cliff. So I'm in on him, but he's still probably outside of my top 24 dynasty receivers.
I'm kind of in the same boat here. It just, especially towards the end of the year, from week 10 on, he only had one game with 100 yards. So it just ends up being real goofy. Of course, we get the coach speak. Todd Monken come out, talk about how Zay Flowers needs the ball more. But this is a team that has to, plans to be run first with Lamar and Derrick Henry. You get Keaton Mitchell back, who was exciting 2 years ago before he got injured. Kind of the lightning to Derrick Henry's thunder. So if they keep trying to run the ball there like that. And then I saw Rashad Bateman end up getting a extension today as well, who doesn't ever end up being fantasy relevant, but ends up being the wide receiver 2 to this team. So Zay Flowers, the guy, if you have him, he's not my favorite. I just don't think it's a guy that I could depend. I see him more as like a top end wide receiver 3 with low wide receiver 2 potential. We'll see. If the Ravens defense wasn't so good and they didn't have the lead all the time, where Zay Flowers would actually have to get peppered with targets with Mark Andrews kind of falling off and Isaiah Likely, we'll kind of see. But I just not a guy that I'm super pumped, I guess you should say, to be targeting. But the next guy that is on the list who I do like is Jordan Addison, wide receiver 20 last year with 875 yards and 9 touchdowns with 3 top 10 finishes. Gets a new quarterback in JJ McCarthy, but as far as wide receivers 2 goes, I don't think there's a better case here than Jordan Addison.
Yeah. Someone I've been less high on, but having Justin Jefferson there definitely helps your cause to have him be wide receiver 2, which I think is realistic for fantasy if JJ McCarthy can be what we hope. TJ Hawkinson is a concern for me, especially as he's healthy again. But Addison, again, I think he's very similar to Flowers. His small stature is going to be hurt at times. But honestly, it's one of those where him not being the primary target makes me kind of feel better about him, because has had a nose for the end zone, which is surprising for a 5'10" receiver, but we got almost 20 touchdowns in 2 years speaks for itself. So
yeah,
the
9 touchdowns probably, if I were to have to guess, probably would regress a little bit just because some of that stuff gets spread around. Justin Jefferson was still good last year, but I mean, wasn't the Justin Jefferson we know to love, especially at the beginning of the year. And I think this Vikings offense, it seems like they're going to try to run the ball a little bit more. They bring in Jordan Mason. They extended Aaron Jones for another year, and they upgraded the offensive line. So even though I don't think you're going to get 9 touchdowns out of him, but I mean, the ceiling's there. And as far as wide receiver 2 goes, I mean, he's a guy who we saw last year multiple times just totally win you a week. So next guy who will not win you a week, I can promise you that, would be Jaden Reed for the Green Bay Packers, who I just end of the year was just brutal. I don't know how you feel about Jaden Reed, but you can go on. If you got anything nicer to say than I do about him, please let me know. Oh, you are on mute.
What's going on here?
There you go. You were there for a second. Now you're off.
Okay. Try to use the mouse pad instead of the mouse and threw me. I like Jaden Reed a lot for the NFL, but the way they use the receivers, he's just a gadget player, it seems like, at this point. Just a bummer after the first 3-4 weeks when he was like a top 3 receiver.
Yeah. It's last year 857 yards and 6 touchdowns, but after week 11, he was a top 24 receiver once after they had the bye at week 10.
It was that many times.
Yeah. I mean, wide receiver 77, 110, 40, 35, 108, 14, 60, 43. So I'm not sure how people feel about him totally, if they're willing to give him another chance to bring in Matthew Golden. Tucker Kraft's a guy we'll talk about here in a little bit. But if there is any value in Jaden Reed, I think I would, if there was somebody who's interested in him, because I don't think some people see what the numbers are saying and just kind of lived off the first couple weeks where he started off week 1, the wide receiver 1 overall, and kind of filtered out from there. I do think that he ends up being a guy that I could probably flip, not for much, but I'd like to get out from under him before people kind of really dive in and see that.
So you're not buying Matt LaFleur and their GM, verifying that he is the wide receiver 1 on the team? Not buying that?
I'm not buying it. So
he's someone who, again, I like him on the field for what he can actually be, but fantasy-wise, I would love to use him as a little booster to upgrade. Like if you're using Jordan Addison and Jaden Reed to upgrade instead of just Jordan Addison into 2. I think it's similar value, but I think I'd rather take a shot on a second rounder at this point.
Yeah, and he just wasn't even a full-time player. He had plenty of chances that just seemed like he doesn't stay on the field full-time for what he does. He gets the end arounds and some of the special stuff, but I'd like to see more Jaden Reed, and just kind of hard with this trio, more of them. Get Tucker Kraft, Dobbs, Wicks, the rest of the gang, and then Matthew Golden, the rookie here. So I don't know.
If he had 80-85% of snaps and was used in the slot more and less gadgety, I think he could be a top 18 receiver, but I can't trust that's going to happen. We just haven't seen it.
No.
We're close to that.
Like I said, I'm out on Jaden Reed personally, and I think he's got a little bit of value left. I don't think people have soured on him, but I don't think they've totally seen the bottom out for him. And I personally would try to move him if I could, if I had him, and just see if I can get anything back, and just think of it that way instead of trying to swap wide receiver 2s basically. But next wide receiver, who is probably my favorite on the list here, is Rashee Rice. Tore his LCL and PCL last year, but the top 3 weeks of 2024 when he did play was clearly the focal point. He was wide receiver 14, 16, and 3, and basically took the Travis Kelce role. So I think there's a little bit of a buy window for Rashee Rice. He is expensive. I mean, this is not something we are hiding from the masses here, but this is a guy that I really like, and curious how you think about Rashee Rice going into 2025.
The only questions I have, it's health and is he going to get suspended? But if he's healthy or is tracking to be healthy by midpoint of the year, he's a borderline top 12 receiver, and he'd probably be around wide receiver 8 right now if he didn't get hurt. I think that's where he was trending towards after winning the Super Bowl 2 years ago and the first couple weeks of this year. Again, so we've talked about it. I have no real faith in Hollywood Brown, Xavier Worthy, whatnot. So Again,
Juju Smith-Schuster.
Oh, did they re-sign him?
Hell if I know.
But
possibly
in the first 3 games of the year, he had 29 targets, had 24 catches. The yards per catch were actually solid. So he's a dynamic player. Did not realize how much of a yards after the catch threat he was while he was at SMU, but I think he's a pretty well-rounded player. Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, I trust. Again, he's in the Travis Kelce role, like you said. So,
yeah. So, I think he's expensive. Like I said, I'm not trying to sit there and try to sneak. You're not going to sneak this on anybody in Dynasty if you're trying to get him, but I do think he's worth the price if you can, because there is a little bit of dip before people see his upside again. Because anytime you can get a little dip on somebody who's hurt, it seems like he's practicing already. I believe he'll be ready for week 1. His injury was week 4, so has plenty of time this offseason. Didn't tear his ACL, which I think is a big one as well. So,
don't panic if he starts slow the first few weeks.
Yeah, there you go. Another buy low window. So
yes, I definitely would try to wait till like week 3 because he'll start slow. He's missed a year, so at that point, that's probably going to be your best buy window, hopefully.
Yeah. So a couple more wide receivers, not the flashiest guys in the world, but going to Denver with Marvin Mims here. Really interesting. Last couple weeks, top 3 and top 6 finish. The last 2 weeks of the past season in 2024. They bring in Pat Bryant, who I thought was kind of an interesting pick this year as a rookie. I actually think Pat Bryant will end up being the wide receiver 2 on this team. And then Marvin Mims kind of gets in that Devon Vele, really like a very boom or bust wide receiver 3/4. Not going to be startable, but I just I don't know. We've seen Sean Payton offenses. He has use for guys like this, but just being able to start him every week is just kind of going to be tough.
I have no opinions on Marvin Mims.
Just,
I guess if you're in a league with return points, but yeah,
is what it is. So
he's small and fast, I guess.
That's about it. And then next guy, Cedric Tillman. This is another really interesting one, and I know you're pretty high on him, so I'll give you the floor here to talk about Cedric Tillman.
Yeah, I love Cedric Tillman coming out. I think he was my 3rd or 4th wide receiver. Had a first-round grade on him. Struggled the first couple of years. He's dealt with a lot of injuries off and on, and his senior year, which is why he did fall to the 3rd round. But the stretch last year between week 7 and 11, which had a bye in there, had 12, 9, 11, and 8 targets, 75-plus yards 3 times, handful of 3 touchdowns. Some of that was the Jameis Winston effect, but he was a top 14 wide receiver 3 weeks in a row. I do think he's going to be the X receiver on the team. A lot of targets there. I don't trust Jerry Jeudy, especially not as wide receiver 1. And I don't think Tillman will necessarily be a 1, but I think he does have legitimate wide receiver 2 potential. He's a big target, sturdy hands, able to be used around, will block. So I think he's going to be on the field more than you might think, especially if they're losing faith in David Njoku. He might get traded at the deadline on a contract year. So I'm all in on Tillman, someone I'm trying to buy everywhere.
Not sure if I'm all in, but I do think that before he got injured, once he started getting that like full-time role, had 3 top 12 finishes between week 7 and 9, and then he got hurt in week 12 with a concussion, kind of knocked him out. So I think a lot of people honestly have just forgotten about Cedric Tillman and what he did in that stretch. We will see about the quarterback. I don't really I do not have any gauge on it. I would assume that Dylan Gabriel will get some run, but I just they got Kenny Pickett, they got Joe Flacco, who I think people forget how bad Joe Flacco was last year with the Colts because he was so fun for like a month with the Browns in 2023. So we'll see. But if Tillman ends up having like
for most of that stretch too.
Yeah, I mean he's delivering turnovers anytime he could. He might as well be at Arby's, handing them out the window. But it just we'll see about Cedric Tillman. I think this is like I said, a lot of people forgot his stretch, and he's a great wide receiver too, I believe. And if you don't believe in Jerry Jeudy, I think Tillman really flashed there. So
It's stretching a lot, but again, he was forgotten about a lot his last year at Tennessee. If you look at his junior year, he absolutely scorched Bama and Georgia. Went for, I think, over 203 touchdowns against both of those teams with dozens of NFL players. So the talent is absolutely in there.
Yep. So last wide receiver that we will get to before we get to tight ends, guy that both of us like a lot, which was Mr. Josh Downs. And like I said earlier, talking about the Anthony Richardson injury, this kind of leads to Daniel Jones leading the charge here at quarterback. This is something that really helps Josh Downs if Daniel Jones is the one throwing him the ball. 4 top 12 finishes in 14 games that he played last year. So, and that was with Michael Pittman playing with a back injury, but ends up interesting, especially now that I don't want to put in pen, but I think it's pretty certain that Daniel Jones probably start most this year for Indianapolis.
And Pittman's hurt again too today as well. So
surprise.
Yeah. We did see, I don't like Daniel Jones. I think this has been made pretty clear. But fantasy-wise, he did get Wan'Dale Robinson to be pretty solid last year with spamming those short targets. And what was it, through the first 7 weeks, had 8 targets in all but one of the first 7 games. Continued to see that. So, and Josh Downs is a significantly better player than Wan'Dale, though he'll be in a similar role. So I could see, especially if we do have Michael Pittman missing a lot of time, Alec Pierce is just boomer bust. A.D. Mitchell appears to be the same. So I think Downs is the best receiver on the team. And I think he could be getting 10 targets a game. And even if it is 10 targets, getting 7 catches for 68 yards or whatever, it's still very relevant for fantasy. And he's way more trustworthy than Wan'Dale was, more of an athlete, just better overall. So I'm still in on Downs, but the Daniel Jones of it all is still scary and gross.
Yeah. And the other thing, too, is them drafting Tyler Warren, who ends up kind of in the same part of the field as Josh Downs, which gets a little goofy. You get Michael Pittman as the X. You get Alec Pierce basically just running that long bomb shot that he's honestly did really well last year with. And then you have A.D. Mitchell, who didn't do anything last year, but some of the metrics on him, I know a lot of the data, people like him. Not my favorite totally, but Josh Downs really interesting. And the one thing about Daniel Jones is this team, when Anthony Richardson was on the field, it was just 3 and outs constantly. And I think just having the chance to be on the field for more than 3 plays at a time with Daniel Jones, even if Daniel Jones is not great, I think that really helps the volume portion of the program for Josh Downs and Michael Pittman too. So that's
does bring me the question: did the Colts draft their quarterback of the future in Tyler Warren? Is he the best passer on the team right now?
Possibly.
I like Riley Leonard a lot, but as a backup. But as a backup,
he'll end up being quarterback too. And if Daniel Jones gets hurt, you get the Notre Dame prodigy coming right down the road to Indy, who is like, I don't want to call him a hybrid of Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones, but it's a guy who can run a little bit and couldn't hit the ocean if he was 5 yards in front of him. So welcome to the club, pal.
Yeah.
So that's
the Colts. What a disappointing team.
Yeah,
hey, at least
I'm so glad
being gone. I think it clears the path to just reset.
Which
just needs to happen.
What they're going to have to do. But as far as and a lot of these, I think it's going to change a little bit. But the value for Michael Pittman and Josh Downs was already pretty low with Anthony Richardson competing. Now that I think that once Daniel Jones is in, I think their value will bump up a little bit, but I do think there is kind of a buy window here for them. So
agreed.
We got a couple tight ends before we get out of here. We're going to escort Sam Laporta off the list just because I think he's done enough. But the first guy on this list, former first-round pick, who's really interesting here, and that would be Dalton Kincaid for the Buffalo Bills, who just, I don't know, just kind of goofy. Seems like he's already injured. Again, he finished tight end 26 last year with 448 yards and 2 touchdowns. So you felt like you were kind of in on him last year and kind of boat crash.
I thought he was going to be tight end 1 last year, but that was more of a opportunity. I was never a huge fan of the player. So lesson learned, even if you don't love a player, opportunity doesn't trump everything. But I don't know. I think with where he's at right now, probably a bit of a buy on him. and he had a huge target share between weeks 4 and 16, which granted 4 weeks were missed there, 1 by week 3 to injury. He had set 6 targets, 1, 2, at all of those games, but 1. So like a 9-game stretch with at least 6 targets, which is pretty good for tight end still, even as the position does get a little better league wide. But I don't think he's going to be a top 5 tight end. He's not going to be close to 1 or 2 other guys. Yeah, I'm still taking Laporta over him every time. Probably taking Tucker Kraft over him still.
Yep.
But people hate him right now. I've seen him sold for 3rd rounders, so at that point I'd buy him for sure.
Yeah, this is definitely, I don't want to necessarily call it a buy low just because he hasn't really shown much, but this is a former first-round pick. The problem is he's fighting with like Khalil Shakir and Josh Palmer for that role because he was basically drafted as a wide receiver. Remember in that draft, I feel like the wide receivers got away from the Bills, and then at the end of the first round, they ended up drafting Dalton Kincaid to be basically the wide receiver weapon for Josh Allen. It just hasn't worked out. Like I said, finishing tight end 26 is very hard in tight end land just because, I mean, outside of Brock Bowers and Trey McBride and George Kittle, there really is not much going on week to week. So it's
yeah, him and Josh Allen's, they just were not meshing whatsoever, which then Dawson Knox and Josh are like best friends. So, and Knox is still a solid player. So that's a big concern for me. Just the chemistry just isn't there.
He's worth the dart. At this point, he's worth the dart throw because I think people are ready to just kind of throw in the towel for him. If you've got something, especially if you're like a tight end premium and just kind of need another body. I'm not sure you're going to get like the top 5 tight end I think a lot of people expected out of him when they were drafting him rounds 3 and 4 last year and just regular redraft, which looking back on is kind of nuts when you think about it. Him, Kyle Pitts, those guys. But is what it is.
Would you take him or Kyle Pitts right now?
Oh God, man, I probably Kincaid. I just, which it probably honestly should be Kyle Pitts because he's got the 1,000-yard season in front of him, and he's got the higher draft capital. But I think I
feel like the injuries on Pitts they seem to have really sapped him.
Yeah, just sapped him of all the juice that he once had, which is a shame. But Kyle Pitts probably should be the answer to that question, but I'll go with Dalton Kincaid here. So,
would you take any of the rookie tight ends aside from the 2 first rounders over him? The Terrence Ferguson, Mason Taylor, Elijah Arroyo, or the other one who'd I miss?
Arroyo, Fannin, Harold Fannin.
Fannin, yeah. Would you take any of those guys over Kincaid at this point?
I would take a chance on Ferguson. Just because the Rams sound like they liked him a lot. And then the rest of the guys are just kind of, I know Arroyo ends up being like the Noah Fant replacement piece. So I would
consider Taylor over Kincaid, but I don't think I'd be able to pull the trigger unless I'm in a deep rebuild.
I think it's just got the Jets stench. I just can't.
That's
as bad as that sounds.
Yeah. Sorry, JJ.
Yeah. This is, of course, if you didn't know already, a Jets podcast. I want to make sure we hit 43 minutes. Had to make that clear. I should have done that at the top of the show, but had other business to take care of. But
now here's a transition to our real team of the pod, Penn State, and their former tight end, Brenton Strange.
So, Brent Strange.
Love when that works.
Very interesting. This is somebody who a lot of the fantasy community is excited about now that Evan Ingram's gone. When Evan Ingram was gone last year, he averaged 3.5 receptions and 34 yards. So I know that last year was brutal with, they had McCorkle playing. Trevor Lawrence gets hurt. Offense just falls apart. Is Brenton Strange a guy that you are into right now?
I'm not going to say I'm into him, but I mean, with the 2 dominant receivers they have on the outside, and I like Parker Washington, also Penn State, but he's just a little slot guy. So I guess I'm interested just for shits and giggles, if nothing else. But who knows? You might find yourself backwards into a back end tight end 1 just in volume, but especially if their defense continues to suck. So I'd be interested, but I'm not I'm taking like all the rookies that we just mentioned. I'm taking all of them over Strange. So
that's where I'm at too. I'm not near as excited as some other people for the Brenton Strange experience, because it seems like some people out there really think that he is going to, take off and go to the moon, and that's just. I mean, I know last year was a disaster and dumpster fire and something that doesn't need to be revisited, but the Trevor Lawrence experience so far in the NFL has not all of it's his fault, but as far as like volume and is he going to carry 3 players, we haven't really seen him carry one. Christian Kirk, Brian Thomas Jr., a lot of his stuff happened with Mac Jones, some of his best games last year. Offensive line is about the same, which is not great to say the least. So it just, I know everybody's I'm not really as excited as other people for this Jaguars offense. I see the vision. I know Liam Cohen has done some great stuff with Baker Mayfield and Trevor Lawrence, the former prodigy and number 1 overall pick. But I think this is a good time if you can flip Brenton Strange. If you get somebody who's really excited about him, I think it's a good time to do so now instead of later, because it's just really hard to see him with Travis Hunter, top 5 pick, Brian Thomas Jr., I believe top 10 overall pick. I mean, that's a lot of competition, along with the running backs who seems like going to get a lot of work. So,
I'm taking his former teammate Theo Johnson over him. I get the quarterback situation's far more dire in New York, but talent-wise, I think Theo is a way better player. He's a much better blocker. Strange is just a slot receiver. He has no blocking chops whatsoever. So I don't see him really having a big role.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat with you. I don't know if I can go down to Theo Johnson level, but I get the sentiment, and I don't blame you for thinking that either.
I think we established last week that I'm really high on Theo, so there's biased eyes there, I'm sure.
Right. So last guy before we get out of here, Tucker Kraft, who I think is very interesting. Last year, I think a lot of people, him and Luke Musgrave, people were trying to figure that out. Tucker Kraft
Luke Musgrave
really established himself. 70 catches for 707 yards and 7 touchdowns in a Packer offense that had a little bit of everything in the wide receiver roulette game that we played.
Mm-hmm.
The wide receiver room is still a mess, but Tucker Kraft, I thought looked really well and ended up finishing really strong too for a tight end. So they had Matthew Golden. We still haven't figured out the wide receivers. They lose Christian Watson. Tucker Kraft, is this a guy for you?
Yeah, I think he's probably the receiver / tight end in this room I'm most interested in. Musgrave actually isn't far behind, who was one of my draft crushes. But yeah, I think Kraft. Oh, I need to click the button. But I'm into Kraft. Him being a tight end 16 points per game last year was surprising. I thought it'd be a lot higher, but he's the most trustworthy receiver on the team, I think. And I would rather him over any other weapon on the team. I think I have him probably close to tight end 8, dynasty wise. So yeah, I'm in on him.
Yeah, I'm in on him as well. I think it's really interesting. I know, like I said, they brought in Matthew Golden. We'll see. I don't think he affects much of Tucker Kraft's game. He's just one of those fast wide receivers. But as far as Tucker Kraft, especially underneath, it got really weird for Green Bay last year as far as the offense goes. They just ran Josh Jacobs into the ground. They didn't seem to trust Jordan Love, who ended up getting hurt, and I don't know if he ever came back the same.
That injury, he was dealing with that all year, except for the last 3 weeks, it felt like.
Right. So, but that's I think we're both in on Tucker Kraft, and I think taking a shot on him at tight end. I'd rather have him, of course, over Brenton Strange.
For sure.
Dalton Kincaid, obviously. So kicking it off on a good note here with Tucker Kraft here. So
he's closer to Sam Laporta than any of the other names we brought up today, for sure.
Yep. So that's going to wrap it up here for our junior players, the 3rd-year breakouts, and all the guys that you guys would need to know. After this, over at Fantasy and Frames, Stacey Perez and the gang, they're going to do the draft show with Mike Shope. So go out and check that. Joe, before you leave, you got any plugs, tags, current events, articles?
My Orioles seem to be getting out of the hole, so you can probably, maybe. They're still 12 games under 500, but a man can dream, right? You could find me tweeting about the O's or my articles I have coming out at Jolo63 on both Blue Sky and X. And you can find my writer profile on the Fantasy and Frames website. And don't forget to follow JJ at JJ Wenner on Blue Sky. And you can also catch him with Doug on the Diehards podcast every Wednesday. They had a fun episode yesterday with Ryan McDowell.
Yep. So make sure to check that out. Next week, I believe we will be talking Scott Fishbowl scoring that just came out. So
I believe so.
That'll be exciting. Kick off Scott Fishbowl. I'm over on Twitter machine at always. Oh my God, Jameson rules.
There you go.
Miss that by like a foot and a half. But appreciate everybody tuning in. We'll be back next week. Real quick before we go, like I said, we're gonna miss Anthony Servino. There is a GoFundMe for anybody. We've tweeted that out. Put that in the Discord. Please donate if you can, and if not, just share it. Make sure everybody sees it. And I believe that is it for us this week. So, Joe, if you want to kick us off here, and hope everybody has a great week.
Yep. Thank you guys for watching.
So, vote jury.